I want to welcome everyone today to Disruptive Voices of Pacific podcast. This podcast, as I've said many, many times over the years, exists to give men and women across the Pacific a platform to share their stories, particularly stories that are shameful, that they've lived in silence, stories around abuse, around addictions. And I've now had the pleasure of interviewing more than 100 Fijians in the last 2 years, and my life has been profoundly impacted as I've interviewed them, heard their stories, cried with them, walked with them. Many of them I've walked with and journeyed with after the interviews. And so again, today we have another very special woman who has joined us to share her story. You will see that her screen is off because we want to protect her identity. And also we have changed her name to Jane. That's not her real name, but today we are calling her Jane. So I want to say welcome, Jane.
Thank you for having me, Letitia.
Yes. It's just a real honor to have you with me today and speaking out to all of our viewers. You live in the country of Fiji. And you reached out to me about a week ago with your story because you've seen that I've been posting a lot around the topic of abortion. This is
Mhm.
actually the topic of my next book, stories of women who have had abortions across Fiji, stories of women who have chosen to keep their babies despite the pressure of abortion. And as both you and I are well aware, abortion is alive and well in Fiji. And so that's part of your journey and part of your story that you're going to share with us today. So maybe you're currently around the age, you're in your 30s at the moment, but what was life like for you growing up as a young girl?
So, growing up, I can say it was lonely because I am the only child, and my parents were very active in a church ministry. And, when people hear a pastor's daughter, they think, you have this perfect, loving church filled home. But for me, it was mostly just confined to my room, going to school and back home again and church. So,
Mm.
in terms of my parental support, mom was rarely around for emotional support. Dad was there somehow or the other, but he treated me like a boy, which now I kind of like. But, that was my childhood growing up. And, as an only child, um, people are like, oh, you're the only child. You must have had such a lush life. But somehow I always felt like I didn't belong in that household. And, I was always acting out in school. I would always have teachers calling my parents. I was like a troubled child. And, it was something like I was just supposed to fit in a mold and I didn't. And, you know, I could say I was just like neglected in plain sight. That's like something I describe as how I grew up.
Yeah, wow. But also growing up in the church, did you feel the pressure being a pastor's child to behave, to, I guess, act certain ways? Was there pressures on you from the church?
So, now when I look back at it, so whatever I was told to do, to say, and to be, at that point, it didn't make sense because I was a child. And it was basically because you are the pastor's daughter. How they say it in Fiji is Luveni Talatala. So
Mhm.
if you are a Luveni Talatala, you have certain, postures and certain ways to uphold yourself in the community. But now when I look back at it, I feel it was just because I didn't understand why I was supposed to do what I was supposed to, or why I shouldn't be doing what I had done at that time. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're just a child, being a child. Um, so at the age of 17, you found yourself pregnant.
Yes.
Was that part of the loneliness? You were looking to guys to make you feel loved or less lonely, or what were the circumstances around that?
So I got really close to a guy in my high school, and so when my parents were not around, I would sneak off to his place, and for some time, I was like, "Oh, I'm a Christian girl, and till we get married, we are not gonna sleep together." And it came to a point where my parents were about to migrate, and since we were teenagers, we made this decision where we're like, "Oh, let's just sleep together, and they won't take me." And that's how I ended up getting pregnant. But little did I know that this pregnancy wouldn't be just the reason why I don't get to travel out of the country with my parents, but it would be the reason why I would get married at that tender age to another man who is not the father of my child.
Wow. Okay. So how did your parents respond when they found out that you were pregnant? Or how did you even tell them?
So I didn't tell mom. I had to tell my aunt. And when my mom got to know, she got really sick. And dad's only response was, I'll get you married off.
And was that in a hope that people would think that, that the man you were marrying was the father of the child and that you were now married and it was okay? Was that kind of a way to deal with the babe?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And how were you feeling at that point? Were your desires or choices considered or not at all?
So I didn't know what to do,
Yeah.
and I didn't know whom I could turn to because prior to about 3 years from that age, so I was 17. Probably when I was about 12 or 13, I was almost raped by a very close family friend. So at this point in time, I was like devastated, and I just didn't know what to do. So the only thing that Christian parents usually tell their children, I'm not saying everybody does this, but most of them or most of us, we were like, "Oh, if you do not listen to your parents, this is what you go through." So I was like, "Okay, let me just listen to my parents, and I won't have to bear any other consequences."
Yeah. Yes, I can understand that. So at 17, you find yourself married to a man 10 years older than you.
Yeah.
And your parents did move overseas at that point.
Yes, they did.
So you were kind of feeling again left stranded. So this marriage again, it wasn't how was that relationship just being, I guess, thrown into a marriage with someone you hadn't picked? How was that relationship?
So, when news of me being pregnant spread, my entire family abandoned me. And till date, I have never been able to connect with them. And my marriage it was really shocking for me because as soon as I I signed the document, the first night with this man, he got drunk
Mm.
and he beat me up with the intention that I miscarry the child I was carrying.
Wow.
And so the neighbors called the cops, and this continued for a good 12 weeks.
Mm.
And as soon as I finished my 12th week, so in between that time frame, he kept giving me homemade potions, or we say Fijian medicine, to drink to abort the child. He used to get me old women that would massage my tummy. They would, poke inside of me just to miscarry the baby. And I remember there were nights where I would just sit on the couch when he was like drunk and passed out. And I would just cry and say, "God, I want to see this child."
Mm.
And it came to a point where one day while he was taking his bottle of beer out of the refrigerator and I was trying to drain some water out of the boiled egg pot, I vomited in the sink, and when I turned around, he hit my beer belly with the beer bottle that he had in hand, and that was one of my very traumatic moments in life. I was then hospitalized. Well, thank God, my that's my son, and he's still
Mm.
alive. He's a 16-year-old, and after he was born, the abuse continued. It just elevated to the next level because he didn't want the child. So one night while he was drunk, I asked him if he could sleep with me, and that was the first time I slept with him, and I conceived my daughter just so he could divert that attention from myself and my son because he used to beat my newborn child as well.
Mm.
So when my daughter got born, things changed a little bit, but he would continue abusing me, and it came to an extent um, where I would have bruises like on my face, and I used to like steal money from him when he used to be passed out, and I used to hide those money um, so
Mm.
that I could like just escape somewhere.
Yeah. Wow. So when he agreed to marry you, did he, I mean, did he say he wanted to look up, be the father of your child, or?
So I'm not gonna well, this is my personal opinion. So when he married me because I was the only child, and he had his eyes on probably my dad's inheritance because every time he used to abuse me, he would say, "Oh, your dad hasn't given me any money. Your parents haven't, given us any money." So those were some lines he used to use when he used to beat me up.
Yeah, okay. So
So
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
so he did agree to get married to me and look after the child. He still is a very sweet talker. And I remember he's from a Catholic background. I'm from a Pentecostal background. And to some extent, he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna convert to your denomination," which he did. And when things didn't look out, because my parents sold off their property in Fiji, and things. So I know he did marry me for the money. And when that didn't work out for him, he just started taking that out of me.
Yeah. Wow. So your church that you'd grown up in and been a part of, where were the people at this point? Was there any support from people in your church, or what were they doing? Where were they?
So people at that point till today, well, at that point in time, they knew my childhood, that I was alone. And after I got married, they knew I was being abused. But then, when they would talk to me, they would talk as if they cared for me. But then later, about 5, 6 years later, I got to know that I was a hot topic for them during their gossip sessions. So yeah, that is how church was for me.
Mm. Yeah, I think when what you emailed me to me last week, you made the comment that you found it to be more of a place of judgment than support.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is so incredibly sad. And I think it's one of the big reasons why Fiji's abortion rates are so high because of the religion and the judgment and the shame and the silence.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be that way. So
But no, shouldn't. The more churches, the more people who say they follow God, there should be a lot more support and compassion and empathy. So wow,
so,
so you were in this relationship for 9 years with this abusive man. How did that eventually end?
so when oh, where do I start from? Okay, so eventually there came a day where he he started accusing me of cheating on him because he used to work on and off. So he was like, "Oh, you stay home, you cheat on me," and he picked up my kids and he like literally, threw them on the floor,
Mm.
both of them. And that day, I took my kids and I ran off to an aunt's place. And when I got there, she was like, "You know what? You need to go back to your marriage. You need to honor the matrimony of your marriage." And she called my husband and told him that your wife is here with both your kids. And so we took a walk. Um, and while we were walking, my husband and my two kids, we were crossing the railway bridge.
Mm.
And I told my husband, I said, "You know what? I'm going to jump off the bridge if you don't promise that you will help me to continue my studies." And in the spur of the moment, he agreed to help me further my education. And I entered into University of the South Pacific. And I still am grateful to God that He used my husband, for me to enter that pathway. So when I started studying, that is when I realized that, whatever I was enduring, it just wasn't humane. And it was something that I needed to put a stop to. So I had a study buddy at USP, and we started hanging out a lot, to the extent where he's like, "You need to leave your husband if you really want to be with me." So that was the journey of how I left my husband. But little did I know I had just gotten out of a ditch into a bigger pond.
Yeah, out of a ditch into a really big ditch. Okay, so you find yourself then with this other man?
Yes.
Okay. And how was that a bigger ditch?
So, well, the family case started because, we had kids in question. And since I was a scholarship student, I was renting on my own. So we split the custody of our kids. And then it came to an extent where he took both the kids. And the current, so after my husband, my partner number two, or number three, I would say, apart from my son's dad.
Yeah.
So this guy, he was about 6 years younger than me. And he hadn't explored life, and neither had I. And we started just being spontaneous. And it came to an extent where I got pregnant.
Mm.
And I told him, I said, "See, I'm pregnant." And he was like, "Oh, I'm not ready to have kids." He was younger, he was naive. And there was a lot of lust. And how it gets to be. So he didn't know how to handle sex or restraint. And he forced things when I wasn't ready. And the first pregnancy, I had to go and get that aborted.
Mm.
And they
Because
said,
of the pressure that came from him?
yes. And
Mm.
also the fact that I had two kids whom I had just left to a man who was, very abusive. So I was like, he doesn't want the kid, and I have nowhere to raise my kids because I'm still studying. And that's how I made the decision to get that first abortion.
Mm. And how did you feel on the way, after that, after having aborted the baby?
So the first abortion, to be very honest right now, after I had left my husband and this partner of mine, let's call him Bob. So when Bob started acting out, I had gotten into a very wrong crowd at the university and I had started taking drugs.
Mm.
So my first abortion, I don't know how I felt
Mm.
because I was either high or, I was just not myself at that time. And that was just not the first abortion I had with him. I had 7 in total.
7. Mm.
And it was after I had the third one that I was lying on the bed so usually after the abortion, the doctor would always let me lie down for a couple of minutes and then he would say, if you're okay to go, if you're not dizzy, then you can just walk out, right? So after the third one, while I was lying there, I started begging God to forgive me.
Because you knew that abortion was wrong from.
Definitely, I knew that because, I was raised as a pastor's kid.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to have debates as in during our youth services about how abortion is not acceptable. So while I was crying, the doctor came to me and he's like, "What's wrong? Are you in pain?" He kind of freaked out. And I said, "I'm just feeling guilty."
Mm.
He looked at me and he said, "This was your choice." And I walked out the door and I went the fourth time. I went the fifth time. And every time I walked into the clinic and I walked out, it felt like a piece of me was always taken away. I mean, like it tore my soul. And, as a woman, I would feel like I was worthless.
Mm.
And I felt like nobody could love me. And I wasn't, I just wasn't, I don't know, mature enough to make decisions to move out of the toxic relationship. I just do not know what that was. But in that moment, at that point in time, the only person that I felt understood me was that doctor that performed the abortions. And there were times where I was scared. I was terrified. And I tried to talk with Bob about it.
Mm.
And, he wouldn't listen. He didn't understand. I mean, come on. He was younger than me. So, for him, it was just all fun and games.
Mm.
And it came to a part where I felt so hollowed out when my doctor said, the next time I see you in this clinic, I'm going to chase you out. He said, I help you because you come in. I mean, like there would be there were times where he would say, no, I'm not going to do it. Because all the 7 happened in a period of 18 months.
Mm.
So as a medical professional, he would say, no, I wouldn't do it. But then I would sit down and I would cry to him and I would tell him, like, this is my life right now. This is what I'm doing. And then every time he would be like, okay, since you are studying, you want to get up on your feet. This once I'm going to help you.
Mm.
And then, when you are drowning, you will cling to whatever keeps you afloat, right? And
Yeah.
in that moment, he wasn't just a doctor to me. He was the only refuge in my world at that point in time that, that he would see my shame, he would see my guilt, and he would see me, and yet, he would never judge me. He just treated me like a human, like how nobody treated me.
Yeah.
And every time I showed up at his clinic, I knew I was broken. And, he knew I was drunk. He knew I was high. And there were times where he would see those needle marks on my arms and he would ask me, he was like, what do you get out of this? But he never turned me away.
Did he ever offer you counseling or send you somewhere where you might be able to get support so you don't end up in the same position coming back for another abortion?
He did. There were a couple of places that he referred me to. He would be like, you could go to these places, they would listen.
Yeah.
But every time I almost entered a counseling room, I would always remember how the church people called me names, and how they would talk about me or look at me. And I just didn't want to go through that whole process again. I just didn't trust the system.
And I guess there's you weren't aware of any post-abortion counselors, or there's not really enough resources in Fiji, especially back then, to offer this.
Yeah. There was a counseling center at University of the South Pacific.
Yeah.
And I got a hold of their sessions after my 7th abortion. But apart from you, I have never, ever told anybody about this part of my life, because I felt that there was nobody in Fiji that would understand why I did what I did and would be able to protect, that part of my memory without trying to make me feel like, oh, you've sinned, you're a murderer and stuff like that. I mean, that's the way people talk once you open up to them.
Yeah. Yes, which is sad. And already I can kind of envision some of the comments that are going to come from this podcast, because there's just people out there who say really cruel things in these moments. Like, why did you stay with that guy? Why did you keep sleeping with him? But sometimes we find ourselves in such low positions, and I'm sure you are asking yourself the same question. And as you said, you were feeling absolutely horrible yourself. And when there's a lack of help and support,
And
you're stuck.
exactly. So, I know there are girls out there, women out there who are stuck in a similar rut like I was with this guy. I mean, I've talked to women, and for people that have a very neglected childhood, they tend to be stuck in narcissistic relationships. And a person who is actually stuck in that type of relationship is the only person that will be able to tell you that you feel numb, you feel pity for yourself, but then there's nothing that you at that point in time will be able to do to help yourself out of it.
And I guess, I just want to keep challenging the church because I'm a pastor. If we weren't so judgmental and if we actually stopped and listened and loved people through their sin, through everything, they might come forward and get help. Like if you realize that you were going to be loved and accepted by the church, maybe you would have gone a lot earlier to get help and support. But at the moment, I don't think we're offering that. Unfortunately, now it's beginning to change, and there's some great groups in Fiji, but not enough.
Yeah.
So you did eventually, that relationship ended, and as what happens mostly with young, vulnerable women, they end up in another relationship. So you kept going, but you found the love of your life, who you're still with today. And you finally became pregnant, and you wanted to have that, you both wanted to have that baby. Is that correct?
So, yes.
Yeah.
I first got pregnant, and I asked him, I said, what now? And he looks at me and he says, I'm not ready.
Hmm.
And, since it had become a tradition in my life that men were not ready. I ended up to the same doctor after a year, and I just looked at him. He looked at me, and he's like, okay. He gave me a date, and luckily this time it wasn't a procedural abortion. He just injected me, and I bleeded in the evening. And then a second time it happened again, and he just gave me a pill for it. And when he gave me a pill for it, I got really sick. And when I went to him, he cleared out my tummy, and he placed the fetus on a tray so that when I woke up, he showed it to me. They were triplets.
Mm.
And that was the first time since I had been going to him where, without even him saying anything, I could feel him slap me.
Mm.
And my partner was with me. And, that was like a turning point in our relationship. And he said, you know what? I'm ready to be a father now. He said, I'm not going to take that away from you anymore. So I got pregnant again. And third month into the pregnancy, I had a miscarriage. And obviously we went to this doctor and we told him, because he knew me, like he knew me in and out. So I went to him and I told him, I said, I was pregnant and I've miscarried. And the first thing he said was, I'm going to take you to the police because I feel you have induced your miscarriage. And I said, no, 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 no. I've been clean. I had stopped doing drugs. I had stopped taking pills and injections. I had stopped drinking. I just justified myself to this doctor. And I told him, I said, no, this time I wanted the kid, but it felt like God had just shut that door. I said, can you help me?
Mm.
And I remember I asked him, I said, please don't make me go unconscious. I want to feel this pain. Like, you know, I had come to that point in life where I just don't know. I would do anything just to make right what I was doing wrong all along.
Mm.
And that miscarriage was what made me realize that there are women out there that want to be moms, but I had the opportunity about 9 times, but I wasn't ready. And that guilt, that shame, that brokenness, it felt like my womb had become a graveyard. Like, that's how ugly I felt about myself at that point in time.
Mm. Yeah. Did you feel like God was punishing you? That miscarriage was, God punishing you?
As a Christian girl, yeah, that's what I felt like. And every teaching that I have ever received about God, His love, His mercy, His wrath, everything was just starting to make sense at that point in time.
How many years ago was that?
That was about 5 years ago.
5 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow. So in the last 5 years, how have you come to a place of accepting forgiveness? Yeah, what's your journey with God been like in those last 5 years?
So the first thing I did was I asked my boyfriend, whom we can call Tom now. I asked Tom, I said, can we move away from Suva? And no, sorry, it's like I just couldn't be around that area anymore without feeling bad. And since I had taken counseling units and psychology units, my education was indirectly helping me to figure myself out.
Mm.
So we moved to Nandi. And, there were some days where it was really bad. I would just sit in the room. We had an apartment, so I would just sit in the apartment and I would cry my eyes out. Sometimes I would just walk out of the house at 2 or 3 in the morning just to clear my head. And there were days, and all this while I wasn't attending a church on a regular basis because I still had that stigma that people would judge me and I wouldn't be able to open up to anybody. So there were times where I would just go on my knees on the side of a road, or probably in a drain at times. And I would just cry out to God, like, why did I have to go through whatever I did? And I think the truth is, I kept going. And that is what helped me to get out of it. Like, even though I was angry at my parents, at the church, I was even angry at God.
Yeah.
But one thing I realized in those moments was God never gave up on me.
Yeah.
He kept up. He kept showing up, like even in the form of a doctor, or even in the form of whatever thoughts I used to have to keep going, not to end my life.
Mm.
And then eventually I started doing 14-hour shifts, 16-hour shifts, just to exhaust myself. So, I would end up at home, and all that I would do would be like, hi, Tom. And we would just have dinner together, and then we would just sleep. That's how my routine got to be, till one day I lost 3 very close people in a span of a month. And I realized that I was going into depression. And I reached out to a doctor's clinic in Nandi, and I got hooked up to a counselor. So I started doing therapy sessions. Till then, I would talk about the people that had gone to be with the Lord, but I never opened up to her about my abortions. And one day she goes, there are certain things that sometimes talking to God helps. And that is when I found my current church family. I'm not going to say they're perfect and very accepting, but one thing I can say is when I started going back to church, I had an encounter with God on a very personal basis. And I can say, I have my venting sessions with the Lord from time to time when it gets really heavy. And what I'm trying to say right now is that individuals can help themselves heal. And all they need is just to have a true encounter with Christ, not the Christ that you were taught in Sunday school, not the Christ that you were taught about, growing up, but like a real, true encounter. And it's still a work in progress. Most days it's a dramatic moment in my head. Some days it's surviving, some days it's very joyful. There are days where I just do not want to get out of bed, but then I do. It's just me dragging my wounds and dragging my whole package to the altar, and just just getting into a desperate kind of worship till God whispers and, he gives me the clarity that I need for that particular moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Our time is coming to an end, but there's just two more questions I want to ask you. And you've just described so beautiful the nature of God, the redemption that he gives us, the restoration as we cry out to him, as we surrender. He is always faithful and just to meet us there. And I trust that you're continuing to understand the great forgiveness that he offers you and me. And while we're accepting the forgiveness, are there actually what are the consequences? Even though you're forgiven, are there consequences that you're living in from those choices, from 9 abortions? Are you suffering with physical consequences? Do you still have nightmares? What?
So yeah,
With
there are nights and there are times where I have my, just my me time, and then I'll just sit down and reflect on where I am today and, from where I have come from. And, mostly in those moments, instead of it being a healthy reflection, I start to ache and pain just remembering, that light in the surgery room. Um, I have, I start to have panic attacks if I hear somebody is pregnant. I start to think about, okay, what is going on in their mind? Are they going to keep the baby? Or what if they go get an abortion? Like I start to have those type of thoughts. And when I see young people, like especially those teenagers in uniforms that are in relationships, I start to have flashbacks of my life. And since I have teenagers in the house, I'm always fearful that my son doesn't put a girl through what I've been through, and my daughter doesn't go through what I've been through. And it's like walking on eggshells just around myself, because I've never been able to fully release this burden inside my heart to anybody, because I know people are gonna judge, and they have all these other questions that I'm just looking for answers myself. So yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Well, finally, because I didn't know you existed a week ago, but you saw something on my Facebook page which just caused you to email me your whole story, what you've just shared there, to a stranger. So what caused you to want to reach out and share your story for the first time to anyone?
So I saw your post, and then I went and I listened to the other podcasts, and I tried to get a copy of Disruptive Voices of the Pacific, the book. And I tried, just to connect with the women that have been through abuse. I was like, okay, these are some raw feelings, like nothing scripted. It's just women that are going to use their voices to ensure that another woman gets out of her rut. And when I saw that you were covering something on abortion, I knew that nobody would be honest to come up and be able to stand up against the preconceived ideas of our society. So I was like, okay, let me do this. Because at the end of the day, I feel that healing is real. It's something that you can't borrow from other people. I have to take a step up for it. And if, as is the norm of a society, if somebody stands up and then somebody supports, and then you have a lot of people that come out of their hiding places just to recover and heal and just get back into life's routine and path.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for your bravery and your courage. And just being able to share your story so freely and powerfully and vulnerably today. And I know it will help so many because, yeah, I'm putting this book together and women are sending me their stories, and it's just time to heal. It's time to break the shame and the judgment and to love each other. So thank you, Jane, for coming on today. And we wish you just all God's richest blessing upon you and your two children as well, who are doing well. So, it's amazing that you've still, through all of that, you've been able to raise two fine young children. So well done. Thank you so much.